All right. So I am doing, well, okay. So my presentation is mathematical learning in early childhood and with parental guidance during virtual and physical games. So I had a shared data collection with Melissa, who presented earlier, but I just did the math piece of that. So an important part of my research is the parental guidance piece, and as Melissa talked about earlier, there is research that suggests that parental guidance within the home is a very important learning context for young preschool-age children. But the majority of that evidence focuses primarily on literacy development, and we don't see a lot of stuff about numeracy. And numeracy would be children's ability to reason with numbers and other mathematic concepts so they can apply them to various other contexts, as well as use them to problem solve. So it's a very important principle for children to learn. And as Melissa mentioned earlier, mathematical knowledge is the strongest predictor of school readiness at school entry. So it's something that really should be studied much more. So recent evidence has found that when young children use a predicting and evaluating method to learn difficult math concepts like adding and subtracting, they are more likely to be accurate in adding and subtracting, as well as more likely to spontaneously evaluate their own predictions. So we think that this could be a useful tool to teach young children difficult math concepts. So another important piece of my research is the difference between physical and virtual games. So there has been a little bit of evidence suggesting that physical games can be used for math learning, but there has been very little evidence about virtual gaming contexts, which is particularly concerning considering the growing popularity of using like iPads and things like that as educational tools. So the majority of research that talks about virtual gaming contexts focuses on classroom intervention and literacy development. There has been one study that looked at mathematic development, and that was in a 5th grade classroom where they used a game-based learning system on the iPad to attempt to improve math scores, but it didn't show any significant improvement in those math scores. So we think it's important that we study what effect these virtual gaming contexts are having in the home environment, particularly with really young children, so 4 or 5 years old. So the purpose of my study is first to explore the use of games to enhance children's learning and engagement. Also to investigate how parents guide their children in playing games that focus on learning and using measurement, and we use measurement because it is a difficult math concept that we could use the predicting evaluating method for. And then we also wanted to compare the differences between physical and virtual games. So my first hypothesis is that parents' guidance of the predicting and evaluating method will be associated with increased performance or children's enhanced performance on related measurement tasks. Additionally, we hypothesize that parents will be more likely to provide guidance in the physical games because of the inherent discussion that's allowed by the physical gaming context as opposed to the virtual game. So our participants were 25 families. They were primarily Caucasian middle-class families. For our children's mean age was around 56 months. We had 9 female children and 16 male children participate. Additionally, we had 21 mothers, 2 fathers, and 2 families with both parents participate. Our data collection took place as structured observations in the families' homes. So for our pretest, children were read a book called How Many Ways Can You Cut a Pie? And then they were asked a series of literacy and numeracy-based questions to assess their numeracy abilities. After that, their ability to predict and evaluate measurement was assessed. And then at the end, we gave the family a measurement game and a book that went along with it, as well as some other activities that could allow for spontaneous guidance in math. And like I said earlier, this data collection was a part of Melissa's data. So that's why we came back 4 weeks later for the post-test. And so at that post-test, parent-child dyads were given both the physical game to play and the virtual game to play that both looked at predicting and evaluating measurement. The order that they played the virtual and the physical game was counterbalanced, but we didn't see any significant differences due to the order of the games. At the end of the post-test, the children had another assessment of their numeracy abilities that was very similar to the pretest. And so for the physical game, it was a game called Step to It. And for this game, parents and children trace their feet on pieces of paper. They cut them out and then they measured to see how long their feet were. And then they used their feet to measure certain objects or measure distances between objects and then compare between the parent and child footprints? I don't know. So for our virtual game, we used an iPad. And so on the iPad, we used a game called Bugs and Numbers. And so for this, we asked parents that when an object appeared on the screen, the parents were asked to ask their child to make a prediction about how long they thought it was, and then encourage them to remove the ruler and check the length, and then choose the corresponding number on the side that represented the length of that object. So all of the interactions between parents and children were video recorded and later coded for certain themes. The themes we looked at were parental guidance before a child's response, the child's response, and then parental guidance after the child's response. So for parental guidance before the response, we looked at questioning, explaining, predicting, and evaluating. For questioning, that could be any question that prompted the child to think. So it could be something like, what number do you think that is? Explaining would be offering the child an explanation of a concept or a strategy to solve a problem. So that could be something like the parent teaching the child how to use a ruler. Predicting would be asking the child to make a prediction or a guess about something. So like, how many steps do you think it will take you to get to that table over there? And then evaluate would be asking them to explain why they made a certain guess or response. So that could be something like, why do you think it took you more steps to get to the table than it took mommy to get to the table? For child's response, we looked at, we coded as correct, correct with parent guidance, incorrect, and then we also have a code for the parent answering the question rather than the child actually answering it. And then for parental guidance after the child's response, there were the same codes as before the response with the addition of a provides answer code in case the parent did provide the answer after a child responded to the question or turn. So for our analyses, we did a series of one-way ANOVAs, and our independent variables for those ANOVAs were the child's sex and the child's age, so either male or female, or 4 or 5 years old. The dependent variables that we looked at were the parental guidance codes and the child's performance codes. We also did a series of paired samples t-test to look at the difference between virtual and physical games in respect to children's responses, parental guidance before a response, and parental guidance after a response. So for child performance, each child response was calculated as a percentage of the total responses of that game. And we did not see any significant differences in children's responses between the virtual and physical game. However, we did see a significant difference in the parent answering the question, whereas the parents were more likely to answer the turn for the child in the physical game as opposed to the virtual game. So parental guidance before a response, we calculated this as the mean occurrence of each type of guidance per game. And we saw significant differences in questioning, explaining, and predicting. And parents were more likely to do those 3 types of guidance in the physical game instead of the virtual game. So parental guidance after a response, we saw that there were significant differences in all 5 categories. So questioning, explaining, predicting, evaluating, and providing answer. And they were more likely to do that in the physical game. One of the reasons we think that could be is that parents had their own turn in the physical games, which could increase that number. Additionally, in the virtual games, once the turn is over, the next turn just moves on. And so in the physical game, they have more autonomy to what am I trying to say? They can do the progression of the game themselves rather than it just moving on. If that makes sense. So we asked parents to use a predicting and evaluating method, but many people did not actually use that method. Sorry. And so I wanted to provide an example of a parent that did use that method to enhance her child's learning of measurement. Okay, so where can we go in the 8 steps? You're a good guesser.
choose tabs? No. So how did you know it just takes a little bit less than mine?
And that's what the game was set for me.
Well, how did you know?
All right, so you can see there that the parent asked her child to predict how many steps it will take him to get somewhere, allows him to check for that prediction, and then they engage in discussion afterwards about why it took him more steps to get somewhere than it took his mom. And you can see he really has a very complex understanding of your foot's 2.5 inches bigger than mine, so it's always going to take you like 2 steps more, or 2 steps less than me to get somewhere. So for sex and age differences, we didn't see any significant findings in relation to the age of the child. We did find that for the sex of the child, parents were more likely to prevent touch on the iPad for males than for females. So this prevention of touch method allows for children to think through their answers before actually choosing something on the iPad. And males were more likely to just hit something, and females.
Any comment on that?
And then females were likely to wait for guidance before choosing an answer. But aside from that, there were no significant differences due to the sex of the child. So what we concluded is that children's percent of correct and incorrect scores did not differ significantly between the virtual and physical games, but the parent guidance did differ significantly, whereas parents were more likely to provide guidance in the physical game than the virtual game. And one reason for that, like I explained earlier, is that parents had their own turn to use, and they had more time after a response to give guidance. So for implications, we think that we can make parents and teachers more aware of the lack of social interaction that's involved with virtual games. Additionally, we want to provide guidance to teachers and parents about how to best scaffold difficult math concepts in different gaming contexts. Additionally, we would like to create instructional materials that are more conducive to parental guidance. And lastly, we did ask parents to use a predicting and evaluating method, but like I said, many did not. So we would like to work more extensively on scaffolding that method for parents so that they can use it with their children. And that's it.